The only services that we have not yet talked about are sort of the final services of the high holidays. One of them is Yizkor. Yizkor comes from the same root as memory. So it's the service of memory, service of remembering. You may have remembered on Rosh Hashanah, if you were at the shofar service, the second shofar blowing uses a word of the same root, zichronot. Zichronot, also remembrance. This is Yizkor, same root, Zion, Kaf, Resh. I'm going to just mute everybody just so that it's a little easier to hear. I realize I didn't do that yet. But you're always welcome to put anything in the chat box. And if you have actual questions, you can just raise your hand in between the music. So Yizkor is our service of memory. Many people, especially I think within sort of the liberal branch of Judaism, think that Yizkor is once a year. It's on Yom Kippur. That's when we do Yizkor. That's when we have the Yizkor books. Many of you probably picked up a copy of the Yizkor book if you came by or it was delivered to you. But the reality is actually we observe Yizkor whenever there is a large holiday. So Yom Kippur is one, and then the other three large festival holidays. Sukkot, we will also observe Yizkor. Pesach and Shavuot. They all have Yizkor in them. So I thought I would share with you a few settings from Yizkor, and then we're going to move to the final service of Yom Kippur in just a moment. So I thought I'd start. Much of the liturgy of Yizkor actually resembles some of the liturgy, not surprisingly, that we might do at a funeral or at a memorial service. And much of those texts are the texts of the book of Psalms. Now, if you've never read the book of Psalms, I highly recommend it. It's great reading. It's a great spiritual practice. Some of you may know there are 150 Psalms. So if you're looking, this is a bonus, you didn't come here for this, but if you're looking for maybe a new spiritual practice to bring into your life, if you read 5 Psalms a day, you will get through the book of Psalms every month. There are 30, on average, 30 days in a month, and there are 150 Psalms. And the amazing thing about Psalms is they pretty much cover every emotion, every relationship with God, every symbolism of God's presence you will find in the book of Psalms. But we often turn to the book of Psalms also for comfort and consolation, as there are many Psalms that are provided for that. And so this first setting that I'm going to share with you is a setting of Psalm 103. Psalm 103. It comes from the middle of the Psalm. And it's very popular. And this is a different musical setting, though some of you, if you're in the choir, for instance, will recognize the text. This text is called Enosh. And sometimes the choir, not every year, we've done a setting by Lewandowski. And it's just beautiful painting of words. It says, our days, they are like the grass of the field, like flowers in the meadow. They vanish in a momentary gust of wind, gone, never to be seen again. But God's love is infinite and with us forever. God's goodness reaches far into the future. This is the gift of the covenant. So unlike the flowers which bloom and die, unlike the grass which can blow away, we look to God in contrast for being that constant. This is a setting of Enosh by Cantor Shira Nafshi. Enosh kechatzir yamav ketzitz hasadeh ken yatzitz ki ruach Avram rovenenu velo yakirenu od mekomo v'chesed bivnei vanim, livnei vanim. Enosh kechatzir yamam, ketzitz hasadeh ken yatzitz. Enosh, Enosh. I think it's like a very comforting melody, but there's a lot of Jewish flavor, a lot of those little half steps. It sounds almost like I could imagine being in the Middle East. Da 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 da. So I love the tonality of it. I think it just has a delicious flavor while still feeling very, very warm and comforting. Another piece that is often used in the Yizkor service actually comes from the end of Adon Olam, the very last verse, which says, Be'ado afkid ruchi. And ruchi you might know because you might know the word ruach. And whenever we stick E on the end of the word, it means my. It's the singular possessive. So ruchi is my soul. And I don't actually need to translate this because I actually will sing the translation as part of the song. Give me 1 second because it says my battery is about to die. Okay. Problem solved. We're charging again. So I share with you this text. This is a setting by Craig Taubman, who's really one of the great composers of what I would call, if we thought of Debbie Friedman's music as sort of like the folk world of bringing folk and Jewish music together, I would say Craig Taubman is the one who really brought contemporary sounds, contemporary music, sort of adult contemporary sound, and wedded it with Jewish music. Really was one of the first to do that. So this is Be'ado. Be'ado afkid ruchi, be'et ishan ve'ayira, ve'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li ve'lo ira, ve'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li ve'lo ira. My soul I give to you, my spirit in your care. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Hold me in your hand. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Safely in your hand. Be'ado afkid ruchi, be'et ishan ve'ayira, ve'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li ve'lo ira, ve'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li ve'lo ira. So for those of you who have attended a Ne'ilah service before, we know this is the conclusion of Yom Kippur and also the conclusion, therefore, of our days of awe. And there's a lot of really beautiful imagery that we see. One of the images we see very often that's used in the liturgy is the setting of the sun. Of course, how do we know when Yom Kippur ends? We know because the sun is going down. That's the signal to us. The other symbol, in addition to the setting sun that we see a lot in Ne'ilah, is the closing of the gates. This idea that these gates were open for 10 days, an opportunity for us to enter into God's court, for us to put ourselves in that space where we could process what we needed to process. Throughout the month of Elul, we took care of our souls. We took accounting of our souls, and now we know that we have had, since Rosh Hashanah, the opportunity to make amends, to ask for forgiveness, to do our own work on ourselves, and now we know the gates are closing. Now, of course, the gates are always open. I sang that last week. The gates are always open. It's not to say that you really have to wait a whole year to ask for forgiveness. I always highly recommend asking for forgiveness in the moment, because that's when we know we are going to achieve, and we don't have to keep track, and we don't have to remember everything, but we take action in the moment. But you'll see that in a lot of the liturgy that you'll hear now that comes in from Yom Kippur, you'll hear a lot of that imagery that the gates are closing. And I love this moment because, some could say, like, it's a little chutzpahdik. We had all this time, but we're waiting till Ne'ilah. And we say, what do we say to God at that point? We say, God, I need one more chance. It wasn't enough on Rosh Hashanah. It wasn't enough the 10 days in between. Yes, I came to Kol Nidre. Yes, I came Yom Kippur morning. Oh, we repented. Ashamnu. But we say, God, I just want one more chance before the gates close. This is like who we are as Jews sometimes, right? A little chutzpahdik. We had plenty of time, but we say, I'm gonna give myself the full amount of time. And so I share with you now a few settings of liturgy surrounding the closing of the gates. The liturgy that we often hear is this text, Patach Lanu Sha'ar, is one of the main texts we hear, which says, keep the gates open for that one last moment. One last moment, we're asking you, for Ne'ilah, to keep the gates open for one more moment. This is a beautiful setting that I just learned last year. We did it for the first time last year, but I just love it, and it's by composer Eliana Light, and it's called Keep Open the Gates. The sun is setting, the gates are closing, the day is through. The sun is setting, the gates are closing, we're here with you. Keep open the gates. Keep open the gates for us. Keep open the gates at the end of the day. The sun is setting, the gates are closing, the day is through. The sun is setting, the gates are closing, we're here with you. Keep open the gates. Keep open the gates. Keep Keep open the gates for us. Keep open the gates at the end of the day. P'tach lanu shar b'nei ilot shar. P'tach lanu shar b'nei ilot shar. The sun is setting, the gates are closing, we're here with you. Just a new favorite melody of mine. Here's another setting, very similar text. Also on the theme, Pitchu lanu sharei tzedek. Not only asking for the gates to be open, we're asking for the gates of righteousness to be open, the gates of justice to be open. Maybe the gates of our repentance are closing, but there are so many things that we strive for the rest of the year, for justice, for peace, for gratitude, for the rights of others, for those who are suffering. And we want to make sure those gates continue to be open. So this says, Pitchu lanu, keep open the gates for us, the gates of justice, the gates of righteousness. This is by composer Bob Remstein, who's a Jewish composer in Southern California. Pitchu lanu sharei tzedek navovam nodeya. 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 Pitchu lanu sharei tzedek. Pitchu lanu, pitchu lanu, pitchu lanu. Pitchu lanu sharei tzedek navovam nodeya. 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 Another piece of liturgy that recurs actually throughout the holidays, we actually heard it on Slichot, is the text Adonai Adonai. We call this often the 13 attributes of God, as it is a litany of many of the characteristics of God. We say Adonai Adonai, God, compassionate, gracious, endlessly patient, loving, true, showing mercy to the 1000th generation, forgiving evil, forgiving defiance, forgiving wrongdoing, and granting pardon. And it's a very humbling prayer. There are prayers of praise where you feel like we're jumping out of our seats to extol God's praises. But here we understand that God has so many different attributes that affect us in so many different ways. Forgiving evil and showing mercy and being endlessly patient. And I think like so many of these attributes are the reason that so many of us have that relationship with God. Those moments perhaps when we feel most alone, the moments where we don't feel supported, we need that compassion. We know that God is there. There is a force there, whatever you want to call it, that helps us not feel so alone, that helps us understand that there is another being who is compassionate and gracious and endlessly patient. Sometimes, especially lately, I feel like I need more endlessly patient beings in my life. It is good to know that God is that endlessly patient being. So I'll share with you first the melody that probably is most familiar to you, as it's the one we, not always, but most often have done at Temple, and then I'll share with you a newer setting as well. This is The Familiar by Louis Lewandowski, who was one of the leading composers, really, of the Reform movement, thinking late 19th century Germany. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed L'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha V'Chata'a V'Naker. So I think that melody maybe was familiar to many of you. We sing that often. Same exact text, but a new melody by Craig Taubman. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed L'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha V'Chata'a V'Naker. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed L'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha V'Chata'a V'Naker. So, something else you will notice in the Nila service, that's a great question. Debbie Frank is asking, how do you choose a melody when you have several versions you like? The angst of the cantor. Because there's so much good music out there, right? You know, and they're all, how many Osei Shaloms are out there? Well, Debbie, it's hardest on the high holidays, right? Because we only do this once a year. If I want to do a different Mi Chamocha, I get to sing that every Shabbat. So it's a combination of just thinking about the whole structure of the service. What have we sung recently that's familiar to people? I don't want to do many unfamiliar pieces in a row. So we try to balance it. Oh, that was kind of new. I like that. Ah, now I'm coming home. I love that melody. I can sing along. How much new have we changed? When did we last change the melody? And sometimes, the cantor gets to be a little indulgent and pick a favorite melody that he really loves, that he really wants to share. Yeah, it's kind of challenging. It's trying to figure it out. There's so many good melodies. Good news is we sing Adonai, Adonai 3 times, so you could do a different one every time. Something that happens over the course of the Nila service is that we, little by little, start transforming back to the melodies and liturgy of the regular week. And this idea of anticipation happens all over the place in Judaism. There's so many times ritually when we're just finishing one thing, we're already looking to the next. Some examples I can think of. Shabbat afternoon, if you observe Shabbat and you have services 3 times a day. On Shabbat afternoon, Shabbat morning you read, obviously, the Torah portion for the week. But Shabbat afternoon, you're already reading next week's portion. We're already looking ahead. Even though this Shabbat hasn't ended yet, we're looking forward. There's a tradition that before you break your fast, there's one ritual you have to do. And that is put the first nail in your sukkah. Even before you can finish Yom Kippur, you already are looking forward to Sukkot. You got to bang that first nail into your sukkah, and then you can break your fast. So what we hear over the course of the Nila service is that things continue to start a little bit more somber, but by the end of the service, we're hearing a lot of melodies that are a little more, we say in Yiddish, freilich, a little more happy, a little more upbeat. And so I'm going to share with you now one of my favorite melodies of the high holidays, and that is the melody for Kaddish Shalem. Now, we all know we say many Kaddishes. We say a mourner's Kaddish, we say a Chatzi Kaddish. If you're in a traditional synagogue, you would say a Kaddish for your teachers. But this one is called Kaddish Shalem. Now, the word Shalem should sound somewhat familiar because it sounds like a very popular Hebrew word, which is the word Shalom. Shalom means peace, we say, but it also means wholeness or completeness. So Kaddish Shalem is the whole Kaddish or the full Kaddish. And this melody is a Hasidic melody that comes in, and you sort of, when you first hear it, think like, gosh, this doesn't sound like Yom Kippur. But that's because it's at the very end of the service. And we're already looking forward to breaking our fast and starting that new year. So I share with you, to close today, this setting of Kaddish Shalem. Feel free to sing along. It is very upbeat. It does not sound a lot like Yom Kippur, but it is sung in most synagogues at the end of Nila. Yitgadol ve'yitkadosh Shemei Rabba Amen Be'alma divrach chirutei Be'amlich malechutei V'chayechon uve'yomechon Uve'chaye dechol beit Yisrael Bagala uvizman kariv Ve'imeru Amen Amen Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam u'lamei Amaya Yitbarach Yitbarach Ve'yishtabach Ve'yitpah Ve'yitromam Ve'yitnaseh Ve'yitadar Ve'yitaleh Ve'yitalal Shemei Kodesha Mede Kodesha Brichu La'ela u'le'ela mikol birchata Ve'shirata Tushbechata Ve'nechemata Damiran be'alma Tushbechata Ve'nechemata דמירן בעלמא ויאמרו אמן אמן תתקבל צלותיהן ובאוהן בכל בית ישראל קדם אבוהן דיבי שמיה דיבי שמיה דיבי שמיה ויאמרו אמן אמן יש לומר רבה מן שמיה בחיים בחיים עלינו עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו amen amen. Thank you all so much for joining this series, whether you're at all or some. If you missed any, they're on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/TI Jewish Neighborhood, and you can find all of the videos there. I hope you had a beautiful Rosh Hashanah, and I hope that you will have a very meaningful Yom Kippur. Gemar Chatima Tova. If you don't know, that is a traditional greeting that we give somebody on the holiday. Gemar Chatima Tova. May you finish, Gemar Chatima Tova, with a good seal, S-E-A-L, a good seal. We asked on Rosh Hashanah to be written in the book, and on Yom Kippur, we're going to ask that it be sealed. So we wish everyone a good sealing, and I appreciate all of your gratitude as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the screen for Yom Kippur. Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova. I'm going to unmute you now.